Hi, I'm Tracy.
And I'm Sharon, and we are Feet of Clay, Confessions of the Cult Sisters. So way back in the 1970s, we became radical Christians in the Jesus movement.
We were promoted to leadership in the crazy cult commune Last Days Ministries, founded by none other than Christian music megastar Keith Green.
Now we're sharing our decades-long escape from the trauma and abuse of extreme Christianity.
We tell our own stories and also invite guests to talk about fundamentalism, purity culture, arranged marriages, child abuse, misogyny, homophobia, power-hungry patriarchy, and much more.
Much more. So join us as we share our journey of healing and humor and how we finally found peace and joy on the other side.
Feet of Clay, Confessions of the Cult Sisters, wherever you get your podcasts.
Is it time for a mind shift? If you don't know what that means, then join your host, Dr. Clint Haycock, a former evangelical Christian pastor and Bible college teacher of over 20 years, along the journey of deconstruction and reconstruction of faith, life, religion, and spirituality.
I'm happy today to be speaking with Katherine North. This is going to be a fantastic conversation. I know just reading through your bio, you were a missionary in Japan. You wrote a book. I mean, you've got so many things that we have in common. So welcome, Katherine, to Mind Shift Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you're living in BC, Canada. Before we hit record, we mentioned a good friend of mine that you're going to hopefully hook up with, Janice Selby. She's one of my favorite Canadians. So hopefully we've already established some sort of commonalities right off the bat. I hope you do meet up with Janice.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and I think we have a lot to talk about in terms of what Janice's thing is, the religious trauma piece. I don't know what your backstory is, but if you grew up as a missionary, you've written this book called, what is it, Holy Heathen?
Holy Heathen.
Yeah, Holy Heathen. You founded this program called Queen Sweep. I'm really fascinated to hear what your story is. So maybe we could just kind of start at the beginning.
Sure.
Where did you grow up? You talked about missionary in Japan. Were your parents missionaries and you had to tag along?
Yes.
How did it work?
Yes. So I'm an MK, a missionary kid. When I was 5, my parents moved our family from Indianapolis, Indiana to Tokyo, Japan.
Mm-hmm.
I spent most of my childhood and young adult years in Tokyo. Having a strange experience because on the one hand, I lived in Japan, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, I lived within a self-contained microcosm of evangelical Christianity. And this was, this was pre-internet. This was when one long distance call was a really big deal. We would call our relatives, once or twice a year on holidays. And so I was so disconnected from sort of the world at large, like all children are. My world was created by my parents. And my parents' world, in some ways, I think, was created by the missionaries around them. And so my parents were and are these sweet, beautiful, wonderful, loving people of faith. They have such deep faith. They have so much love. In many ways, they embody the absolute best of Christianity, of Jesus's message. And they were hooked up with some people who I would not necessarily say did the same. So they were part of an evangelical group. This group had been doing missionary work in Japan for a long time. And so you have these two Midwestern kids trying to learn a new language, trying to parent their 3 young children, and trying to spread the gospel as best they knew how. And there I was, there in the middle of it, trying to figure it all out, trying to stay alive in Japanese school, which was not necessarily an easy feat.
Imagine.
But the whole time, my biggest, scariest secret was knowing that while God and Jesus and the church was the most important thing for everyone I knew, my parents, their friends, my teachers, the whole organization that we were a part of. That was the thing for everybody. And I knew that for me, I didn't feel it. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel true. I felt like I was faking.
You weren't
I just
buying
knew
it?
on some, it wasn't even that I wanted to buy it. I was,
Right. I want to believe.
Yes, and they would not take my money.
Oh, I've been there, man.
Oh, I wanted to buy it. And because, I knew that it wasn't true. I was not one of Jesus's little lambs. I didn't know what I was. I didn't have any language for it, but I was something different. And obviously that something was bad, so bad. And that was so scary. So I did what most kids in survival mode would do. I faked it. I sang along. I knew all the Bible verses.
Yep. Wore the mask, as it were. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that really stayed true up into young adulthood. I married young. I was a virgin on my wedding night. I married a fellow Christian. We became involved right away in a church. I did everything that I knew to do. I checked every box I knew how to check. And so I didn't understand why I still felt like I was dying on the inside. I was like, but I did all the things. We did service work. We were chaste. We got married in the church. We didn't have any champagne in our wedding ceremony. And
didn't even drink.
No.
Yep, you did the whole evangelical purity culture thing.
So good.
By all rights, you should have been blessed. That's the thing. It's a formula.
Blessed. Yeah.
Everything you just described, it resonates with me because I grew up in a similar context. I wasn't a missionary, but in a fundamentalist sort of Christian thing. And the way I was raised to believe was it was kind of a prosperity gospel, not necessarily money, but if you follow all the rules, it's a reward and punishment theology. So whereby if you keep all the rules, God will bless you. So by rights, by that formula, you should have been blessed, but it wasn't happening.
No, instead, I just felt like I was drowning. I felt like I was drowning. And my desperation grew more and more intense until I literally felt like I either had to stay in my life, with my Christian husband, my loving church, in this beautiful, harmonious relationship with my parents. From the outside, I was still good. I could either stay in that, and I just thought I was going to die. I wasn't sure if I was going to take my own life or if something, finally, the lightning was going to hit me. But I just was like, I will not survive this life. I will die. It will kill me. Or I could choose to do something that was even scarier in some ways than the thought of death, which was to leave it all behind. And so that's what I did. I left, and I
walked
did it
away
messily. I mean, I wish I walked. It was more like I threw a bunch of grenades, made a huge mess as I went, because I was in my early 20s. I had like zero real life skills. I didn't know what I was doing.
You burned a few bridges.
Mess of things.
Yeah.
Yes, I hurt some good people who I loved. So I walked away from my marriage, my church, my job. I left the city I was living in. I broke my parents' hearts. And then I moved to Chicago. And then instead of being good for several years, I was so bad. I did all the bad things.
Oh, yeah.
I drank alcohol, and I smoked cigarettes, and I swore, and I had sex, and I went to therapy, and I started reading about, witchcraft, and I started using tarot cards. I mean,
you did it all. You get a tattoo as well?
Not yet, but I did many years later. But
right.
Right?
It's so ironic. I can't help but think about this because I've done a lot of studying on cult psychology and the effects that it has on us psychologically. And it reminds me what you said about growing up and kind of having those two selves is, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Dr. Robert J. Lifton, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. It's one of the best books. It literally changed my life because he has 8 markers of cults or high control religious groups, and he describes each one, and he describes the effect it has on us psychologically. And when I read his book, it just blew my mind because I thought I can point to each one in my life where that happened to me, that tactic was used on me. And one of the things he talks about is something called doubling, which is where we have our authentic self, which is what you've been describing, the true Katherine, but you create a second parallel self, which is our religious self. And those two are like they go on a parallel track. But what happens is you suppress the authentic self in favor of the religious self, but it does tremendous psychological damage to us. And your authentic self finally broke out, as I would see it, and you broke that carapace of the religious self and became yourself. And you had to go, the pendulum swung massively in the opposite direction.
It swung so dramatically. And it was funny because on the outside, and in some real ways, my life was an absolute mess. I had no money. I was drinking too much. I was like basically squatting in my brother's apartment. I didn't have a real job. Like I was a disaster, right? I went from on the outside, everything looking like it was good to everything looking like it was an absolute mess.
Now you're at rock bottom.
And yet I was thriving. My spirit was thriving. I started to go to therapy. I started to read books that helped me understand my experience. I started to find other people who, I don't know, who had never even heard of the church. They were like, what do you, like, my whole framework was so irrelevant to them. My whole concept of good and bad and how bad I was being and how terrible everything was. They were like, what are you even talking about? Let's go.
Never heard of it. Let's go see a band. Yeah. Do something fun, productive. That is so ironic.
Over time, the mess sort of sorted itself out. And didn't in some ways. But I remember one time feeling so much shame because my life, by really any measure, was an absolute disaster. I was totally failing at being a good adult. And I was talking to someone who was sort of a respected figure in my community, and they were basically saying, like, aren't you ashamed of yourself? And I was like, yes, I am. And yet also, I just know that this is taking me where I need to go. I don't know where I'm going, but I know that this journey, I didn't even use the word journey. I wasn't that new age back then. But I was like, I was like, all these messes that I am making, somehow they are taking me where I need to go.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you look at it, step back now, you can say if it was a pendulum, it swung from one extreme far to the other one. But the person you were when it swung all the way to the other side, that really wasn't you found that balance. I think it sounds like you've come into some equilibrium in the middle, because everything you're describing is classic ex-cult member behavior. They do the same thing. I did the same thing. I went out, got tattoos. I did all that stuff after I left the church. Well, I was kind of in the middle of it, but you're kind of like doing your adolescence again. You're reliving that adolescence that was denied to us when we were in the church and in that system, suppressing our authentic self. You're going back to, 13, 14 years old, and you're like, fuck you, I can do whatever I want, but you're adult, so it's totally different then, isn't it? You can go drink, you can have sex, you can do all that and go kind of crazy.
Yeah. For me, I had to go even one step beyond the pendulum. I don't know about you, but growing up evangelical, there were all sorts of, sins. There was, drinking and smoking and swearing and, being a woman, that was in itself was just pretty bad just for existing.
Well, you're suspect for sure. You could lead a man astray, and then it would be your fault, you see, in the whole patriarchal system.
Well, because women don't have sexual desires, obviously. They only
clearly
men, to be malicious.
To lead us astray.
Obvious. Yes, of course. That's
what I was raised to believe. I was raised in the Bill Gothard cult. So I don't know. Have you seen that movie or the documentary Shiny Happy People?
I haven't watched it, but
if you see that was my life. The only difference was I wasn't homeschooled in his ATI curriculum, but my parents raised us according to his very misogynistic, patriarchal, modesty culture teaching. So I would say it was a cult. It's definitely a cult, so we have that kind of background in common. I think that strict sort of controlling religious background.
Yeah. So the anti-choice movement was a big part of the world that I grew up in. Abortion was the ultimate sin. There were all these bad sins, but abortion, that was really beyond the pale. And so a really monumental moment for me in my healing was as I began to get my life back together and I started to figure out who I wanted to be. I knew that I didn't want to be part of the church anymore, but I couldn't figure out who I did want to be. And I tried out a bunch of different systems. I tried out some different religions. I tried out, self-help. I tried out sort of the personal development world. Unfortunately, in many ways, it felt a lot like the Christianity that I had grown up in that same sort of prosperity gospel. If you, check these boxes and you'll be rewarded with health and wealth. And I found myself in my 20s pregnant, and I did not intend to be. And I was not in a place where I felt like I could be a good parent. And so I decided to have an abortion. And even though I had left the church, it had been years at this point, I no longer intellectually believed any of it. So this was sort of like the final frontier. And I really wrestled with that choice. I was very torn. It was like the person that I was now could see really clearly that truly the most loving thing to do would be to have an abortion. I was drinking heavily at the time. I was a working actor, about to go on tour with a stage play. I had no money. I didn't have a stable living situation. There was nothing in me was ready or prepared or even willing to be a good parent. And that was true. And yet all of the old programming, all of the old conditioning, all of the old misogyny around what a woman is allowed to do and what is the value of a woman's body and whose life is more important. All of that stuff sort of came back to me in a way that really surprised me.
Yeah, could be very triggering.
So I chose to have an abortion. And what I was not expecting was that when I committed sort of that final sin,
the ultimate
biggest sin, the ultimate sin.
Yeah, a lot of evangelicals would say that.
Absolutely. And I did it freely. I did it.
You weren't coerced.
No, I was not coerced. I was not desperate. I could have reached out for help. My family would have helped me. My parents absolutely would have helped me. This was truly a choice, and it's important for me to own that. What I was surprised by, what I was so surprised by, is that when I did the ultimate thing that I had always been told was so terrible, what happened was that I had a total spiritual catharsis. It became a spiritual rite of passage. And I had a mystical experience where I encountered I don't even know what to call it. It's one of those experiences that really doesn't translate well into words, but I had such a profound experience of knowing that I was loved. Every soul that has ever come into being and ever will come into being, if they ever go out of being, is loved. We are loved. We are loved. And that nothing can take us outside of that love. So where I thought I was doing, a sin.
And the unpardonable sin.
Quote unquote sin.
Yep.
What I encountered was a profound experience of love. And so it was almost like that took me just to the ground zero. It was like everything had been wiped away. My shame was gone. I didn't feel any shame. I also didn't feel beholden in any way anymore to that old framework or those old beliefs. And so I just sort of started to build something brand new, something that came out of that experience of feeling such incredible love. I called it being a heathen mystic. I just made up that term. I was like, I'm kind of a mystic, but I'm still definitely a heathen.
Yeah, what am I?
Yeah. And so I just started to create something for me. Something that for me that was brand new. It's definitely not Christianity, but I go out and I talk to the trees and I feel like they are just saying, like every bit of the universe is just saying, you are loved. You are so loved. And also, and that's it. That's my religion now.
Whatever that is, the holy heathen.
Whatever that is. I don't know what it is either.
Yeah. There's a hodgepodge of a lot of different things in there, isn't there? But yeah, you can't necessarily say this is one belief system. Maybe it's something that works for you. Well, how much of it is you learning to love yourself? Because that's a big part of evangelicalism, isn't the shame, the guilt, like you talked about having an abortion or even walking away from the faith. There's a lot of guilt and shame in there, and how much of that is you learn to love yourself, because that's something Lipton talks about. He says culture and religions, the guilt and shame levers are the two most effective ways to control and manipulate people, until the church uses them to the fullest extent that it can. And so we've got to break out of that too.
Absolutely.
When we come back from break with Katherine, we're going to talk a little bit more about her book as well as her life. rebuilding after leaving the church. She's got some absolutely fantastic advice just as a life coach, someone who's lived it, who's walked this path. So we're going to get into that in part 2, so stay tuned for that. I just want to let you know what's coming up here in the next few episodes of Mindshift Podcast. I finally was able to reconnect with my good friend David Hayward, the Naked Pastor. We had a chat the other week. That is coming up after this episode. We're here with Katherine, and I'm still working on lining up Peter Montgomery from the Right Wing Watch. He's had jury duty, so he's been a little bit busy, so we have been unable to schedule that recording. But there's a lot of stuff we need to talk about, especially the new head of the GOP, the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. I want to hear Peter's thoughts on him. He's kind of come out. He's been a dark horse. No one really knew who he was, but as the story has sort of broken, what we found out about Johnson is he's an extremist, MAGA evangelical. He is a classic Christian right, the guy that I've been warning you about for years. He's a Trumpist. He's a Christian. One of the most concerning things about Johnson is even though he says he respected the law about, allowing gay marriages, the track record shows otherwise. So I want to get into that with Peter Montgomery. And one other really cool thing that's happening, I got a message on X the other day from Dr. Warren Throckmorton, and he, of course, was on the show a couple of years ago talking about the controversial quote-unquote historian David Barton, the Christian nationalist. He wrote a book several years ago called The Jefferson Lies, and it was so poorly researched and written that the publisher ended up pulling it from the shelves. Well, now Dr. Warren Throckmorton has got a new book, or I should say it's the second edition. It's called Getting Jefferson Right. He and Michael Coulter are producing this book, and it's coming out, I think, around the 1st of November. So we're going to give you some information about that. And the interesting thing about the book is that not only does it have 33% new content from the first edition, what I'm really interested to talk to Dr. Throckmorton about is how they have expanded their fact-checking, they say, to include claims about Jefferson by Stephen Wolfe in his book, The Case for Christian Nationalism. And I've had this book on my radar for a while now. I've not really done anything about it. So I'm interested to talk to Dr. Warren Throckmorton coming up soon about Getting Jefferson Right, second edition. And then I've got another interview in the pipeline with Sarah Hayward. Now, this is someone I met through David Morris. He was on the show a while ago. We just had our Mindshift Zoom call in October. It was really good with David. In fact, if you want to catch that, you can head over to Patreon. You have to be a subscriber, but I've posted that video up on the Patreon page. But anyway, David has introduced me to Sarah Hayward, and this is going to be really good. She's got a book coming out soon called Giving Up God, and it sounds like we have a lot in common. So we're looking to book in a date sometime in sort of mid-December. So we've got a lot of cool stuff in the pipeline. And as mentioned, as I said about the video with David Morris, if you want to catch that, you can head over to the Patreon page. You can support the show. As always, greatly appreciated. And as always, the links to that are in the show notes. Now, let's get on back into the second half of the chat with Katherine North as we continue looking at this issue of Holy Heathen, blowing everything up and starting all over.
And so I wrote my book because I really was trying to understand what had happened. And at the time, I didn't know anybody else. This was like before deconstruction was a term. This was like, I sort of was a little bit early to this whole thing. And I felt so alone in this. And I just felt like no one else, everyone seemed to think I was nuts.
Yeah, so I'd be crazy.
In order to make some meaning of my story, I started writing. And I wrote basically for 10 years. Wow. And what I wrote ended up turning into my memoir, which is called Holy Heathen, a spiritual memoir, because it is about leaving something that was so destructive, blowing everything up, having a kind of a rebirth, and then creating a new life as myself. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and learning to love that self.
It's very cathartic, isn't it?
Remarkable journey.
It really is, because we were talking before we hit record about this book. I'm 98, somewhere around in there % finished with it. But what I've learned in it, I've had to go back and add more. So every time I read through it, I think, oh, I've just remembered something else. I've got to go back and add a couple of paragraphs. I've got to add some more stuff here, because it is, the more you remember, the more I'm rehashing it and I'm reliving it. Because a lot of the stuff, I won't say I forgot it, but I guess I suppressed a lot of the stuff that happened when I was a kid that was very traumatic. growing up in a fundamentalist, I would say a cult, suffering from rapture anxiety, things like that. The more I write about it, the more I remember, so I get what you mean. You just have to let it take its course. It's a very organic thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And first, I had to do the writing just to process, just to get it all out. It was a way of venting. It was a form of catharsis. And I did years and years of therapy and coaching, all kinds of work. So at first it was just me sort of trying to get it out so I could understand it, and then shaping it and ultimately turning it into a story that I hoped would be useful, that would become a traveling companion for someone else who, felt lost and felt alone and wanted someone to come alongside them and be like, hey, guess what? It's going to be okay. And the irony now is that my life in many ways looks very much like a life that I think the church would have been delighted for me to have, with some very important exceptions. For instance, I am now married. I have 5 children. We live in the woods. We have chickens. We make these wholesome dinners. I grow vegetables.
You're off the grid.
We look a little bit. In many ways, it looks like this very sort of traditional relationship. There are some key differences. I am queer. My husband is transgender. I am staunchly pro-choice. We are in many ways not at all what the church.
No, just to say you had us up until they were kind of off the grid, and then wait a minute, I could hear that screeching sound. The brakes just slipped on. Most churches would be like, you know what? We love the homesteading idea. We want to like the Rainies and all the rest of it. And then, hang on, transgender husband, and you're nope, we're not doing it. All they might welcome you in though with the view that if you got saved, that God would straighten you out. Because that's a claim that a lot of churches make. They'll say, well, we are inclusive. But what they really mean is, when they say that, what they really mean is, we won't discriminate against you actively. You can come in the doors and participate with the view that when you get saved, God will basically make you straight again. Have you encountered that sort of theology in your journey?
One gift of leaving the church so many, many years ago is that I'm really very removed from that world. And so no one ever tries to convert me anymore.
Oh, good.
It's
You're lucky.
kind of fantastic. Yeah. And I've been so public about my journey that I think most people know that, I would not.
Our lost cause.
But I'm a lost cause. I'm such a happy lost cause.
Beyond hope now. Yeah.
Beyond hope.
Yeah.
Oh, and it's a wonderful place to be. And because I'm now a coach, I work with women all around the world. I feel like I get to, having gone through such a tumultuous journey myself and having felt so alone and so broken and so just fearing for my own sanity so many times, I now get to walk with so many different women. And some of them have a church background, definitely not all of them. But it's like I have such a strength in the human capacity to change and grow and get bigger and get stronger. And I think back to that self who was so new, and I was trying to figure out the world, and it was like I had these tiny little seeds of who I wanted to be. I wanted to believe in a world where love was bigger than hate, where kindness mattered more than dogma. I had no idea what that would look like, and I had little teeny puny muscle. I didn't have any strength. And now, I run this coaching business. We have these 5 kids. I'm writing books. Life is very big. And my muscles have to be big in order to hold this life and manage this life. And it's giving me so much faith in our capacity to heal. And I think, especially when we're first coming out of the church or any sort of a cult or traumatic experience, it can be it's liberating at first to see ourselves in terms of our wounding. That's a really important step in the process, to say, this happened to me. Somebody came and broke this thing. That is such an important step. You never want to skip that step. Therapy is.
It's huge. Yeah. We've been abused and hurt and damaged and all sorts of things that happen.
And I also want to hold out this possibility for people. That's just one step. That's just one step in the process. And there is so much life to be lived. There's so much joy to be had. There are so many kids to be parented. There's so many gardens to be grown and books to be written. There is such a big world out there. And yes, in some ways, of course, we're always healing. I still get triggered sometimes. There's things, but I don't live my life in that identity as a hurt, broken person. I really live my life from this place of gratitude. And I now get to help other people heal, and I get to send them out into the world to do amazing shit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's incredible. It's so incredible.
It's so ironic, Dad, to hear you describe that sort of lifestyle, that existence, because as you said, I can't help but relate it to what you said earlier. Isn't that what the church promised us, though? This amazing, wonderful life of abundance and blessing and spiritual gifts and all the rest of it. And yet at the end of the day, where was it? You know, you and I, we both tried it. It was found wanting. We walked away from it in the end for a variety of reasons. But isn't that what it was supposed to be about? I was always searching for that, you know, the spiritual breakthroughs and all those wonderful things that never seemed to happen.
You know, and it's not just in the church, in the kind of self-development or spirituality world, you will find just as many gurus promising.
It's true. Anything.
You know, I think the real promise, the false promise, is like an escape from our humanity. Like if you just do these things, you won't have to have a human experience anymore. You'll be able to somehow transcend that, right? You won't have to feel sorrow. You won't have to feel hurt. You won't have to feel grief. You'll be safe in such a, I don't know, like a bypassing way. And it's appealing. I can understand why people come to all sorts of religions for that promise. But I think I'm not interested in a spirituality that takes me out of my humanity. I want one that brings me into it, right? That is big enough to hold all of the hurt and the fucked up shit that humans do, because we hurt each other so much. Mm-hmm. I need something that can hold the grimmest realities of the world and also hold just like incandescent, ridiculously amazing beauty of what it is to just be alive on this green world. Mm-hmm. It has to be big enough for both. And I think anything that promises us an escape from that humanity, it's going to be fake. So I only trust the teachers and the teachings that help me be a better human instead of like promise me that I don't have to be human anymore. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because like I was saying, I used to use that same language when I was a preacher and a pastor, you know, all about spiritual gifts and become who you authentically are, you know, and God was invested in helping you to become that person. That's what I used to teach my congregation. It was all about your gifting and all that. So in a weird way, I feel like I was on to something. I don't believe in the religious aspect, the divine aspect of it anymore, but there's got to be a kernel of truth like you just described. Find out who you authentically are and become the best person you can be, however that happens. In this case, like we're not saying, oh, you have to read the Bible and pray and become a Christian and go down that path. So yeah, there's got to be a better way that's not laced with all the religious trauma and everything else.
And I think you can look at what people do. For what I mean by that is, while I have such respect for my parents, they are truly loving, wonderful people, and they've loved a lot of people in their lifetime. And yet, if I look at, as a religion, what Christianity has done, you know, all of the Crusades, colonization, stealing of indigenous children,
the Inquisition,
slavery, exactly. I mean, the list is so long. And recent, you know, we could make a whole new, fresh list of recent abuses too. And I think one of the things that you talk a lot about that I really appreciate is how Christianity has somehow become tied to this right-wing sort of fascist, very frightening, violent framework.
Well, that's the dominion theology sort of aspect of it, isn't it? Christianity taking dominion over the world. That's where there's the militant aspect of it, isn't it?
You know, it's a funny word for me because I actually used that word about 10 years ago. I used it.
I saw that on your email.
Yeah, that is actually was the tagline for my business was declare dominion over your own beautiful life. Right. And, you know, at the time, it didn't have those connotations. And so I sometimes think maybe I should change the name of my business. But I also think that there's something powerful in the idea that the only thing we have dominion over is ourselves. Anytime you try to have dominion over someone else's body, someone else's soul, someone else's decisions, someone else's, you know, anything, that's when we run into trouble. Yes, but we do have dominion of ourselves. I get to make my own choices. I should make my own choices. I should not be handing those off to a pastor or my husband, right? Like,
Yeah.
no, they're mine. Here I am in this body, in this spirit, in this moment, having this human experience. And it is my job to declare dominion over it. And also that is all I get to declare dominion over. That is the only piece that is mine. And for me, that's sort of a useful, a guiding,
principle or whatever. Yeah.
Principle. Yeah. To help me know, like, am I in my business? Am I starting to get in other people's business?
Well, and the thing is, what I was going to say to that is, as long as you're prepared to accept the consequences of your decisions, that's also part of it, isn't it? Yes, I am free to make my own decisions. However, I also have to be willing to accept whatever comes along with that decision, and that I can't point the finger and blame someone else, say, oh, it's her fault, his fault. I made that decision, and I'm willing to deal with whatever comes along. Like your example of getting pregnant. I mean, you made that decision. You had a consequence, and then you had a choice to make, and then you've accepted the responsibility and whatever comes along with that. That's your choice. You can't point the finger at anyone else, can you?
No, it was mine, and I was happy to make it. And I think that is that kind of autonomy. I think underneath all of the things that happened to me as a child, and I'm sure to you as a child, I feel like the real theft was that sense of autonomy, that sense that we get to decide, that we decide for ourselves what is true, that we even have the right to decide what is true. That's, I think, what religion steals from people. And once you lose that trust in yourself, and once you lose that access to your own inner sense of what is good and what is not, and what feels true and what is not, then you're so lost. It's like you've taken away someone's navigational equipment. And so I see my work very much as helping people reconnect that navigational equipment. It's like helping them, set up their own compass again. We all came into the world with it. Religion took it from many of us. And I get to help people. It's like rewiring things.
Rewire the compass. Well, and you're the critical thinking. That's what I was going to say. We were denied the ability to think critically because information was withheld from us, which is another cult classic tactic, isn't it? Information control. Where I was raised, and probably you too, we were not exposed even to other theological traditions, let alone worldviews outside of ours. You talked about the safe little Christian bubble as a missionary, and I was raised in this fundamentalist Christian bubble. But I've realized now I was denied a lot of access to really good information and other traditions. I wasn't even exposed to other traditions within Christianity, let alone, other worldviews. So when you're an adult, you go, whoa, I'm really pissed off that they didn't let me see these other options and other possibilities. I need to learn to think critically for myself, as you're saying.
Absolutely.
So is that your work with the Queen Sweep? Is that the counseling sort of coaching that you do?
So the Queen Sweep is actually one particular program that I've created. It's separate from my private coaching work. The Queen Sweep is a 9-week program. It's all online, and it is for people who I call sparkle brains. So the ones with big ideas and not very much follow through, the ones who like to dream up things but have a hard time remembering them, the classic scatterbrains. It is a program where we declutter. We set up systems to deal with paper, money, to-do lists, schedules, and I help people just create a physical world that works.
So it's kind of life coaching in some senses.
It's a combination of working in the physical world where you actually clear up your home. You make a beautiful, functional home. But absolutely, it is in some ways a really powerful way. When you start to shift your physical world, you also start to shift your interior world as well. So it's sort of just one other way of helping people make beautiful lives that, they literally declare dominion over their physical domain. It is one more way of connecting people back into their power.
Right. It's a holistic thing, isn't it? It's the physical as well as the emotional, the interior space. Yeah, because I know when your house is cluttered, you feel stressed, you feel, Yeah.
It has a huge, Yeah, and all your clothes that are hanging in your closet, they all say something about who you are, who you believe you are, how you expect to be treated, what you think you're capable of. When you start to move things around in the physical world, it can really have a huge effect on your psyche as well. So that's one of the programs that I teach, the Queen Sweep. It's about cleaning up your physical world. I have another program called Practical Magic for Secret Mystics, which is how to create energetic boundaries for people who are very sensitive. I'm incredibly empathic. My nervous system is very sensitive. This is true for many of my clients. It's true for many people who've been through trauma. And I also think that some people just come into this world a little bit more attuned to other people's energies. And if you don't know what to do with all, it's like you have extra radio equipment. And if you don't know what to do with it, it's like you're like Edward Scissorhands. You can sort of cut yourself up accidentally. So Practical for Magic for Secret Mystics is actually a really practical program where I teach people how to just set better boundaries so that they can be in loving relationships with people without soaking up everybody else's pain and sorrow and trauma.
You got a lot.
Those are my programs
that
I teach. Yeah. And then I have an ongoing roster of clients who I work with for 6 months at a time.
Right. Wow. That's a lot. I was going to say, I can see it in your face. You're so fired up.
It's so fun. I love it. I love my clients.
It's true. What do they say? You do the job you love and you'll never work a day in your life, sort of thing. But it's true, isn't it? I feel the same buzz when I'm building furniture. I don't do it for a living, but I'm a carpenter by trade. I teach joinery and carpentry for a living. But in my lunch hours and spare time, I'll get a little bit of time to build furniture. And I feel that same way, that the whole time could just go like in a flash because you're in that flow, you're in the zone. And I think I just enjoyed the hell out of that for that last half an hour or 45 minutes, making something practical, beautiful. And it resonates deep down inside, I think, doesn't it, when you find those things that you absolutely love to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
It's true. Well, I'm looking at the clock. I know we said we wanted to kind of end it at about 45 minutes. I know you got to go, but there's 2 questions I have to ask you. One, in November, we are looking for another guest. We hold our Mindshift podcast Zoom calls, which are a group call with our Patreon supporters. And I'm always looking for a returning guest to come back. So if you're interested, I would love to have you come back. I could throw you some dates if you're available. It's usually around about the last Sunday of the month or somewhere around there. I would love to have you back if you'd want to do that. I can, like I said, I'll throw you some dates. But then the other question is, how can people find you? Where's the best place to get a hold of you if they want to talk to you or get involved in your coaching programs?
Yeah. My main website is declaredominion.com. If the word Dominion freaks you out, you can also Google my name, Katherine North, spelled with K. You could also Google my memoir, which is called Holy Heathen, a spiritual memoir. And if you're interested in the Queen Sweep, go to queensweep.com. And I have a free course that'll take you through 5 quick things you can do right away to help life feel a little lighter.
That sounds great. I was going to say, I don't know how you got away with that domain name, because there's got to be some serious Dominion theology preachers that would love to have that domain name, declaredominion.com. I want that name if I'm a Dominion theology.
Oh, funny.
I think no one's gotten hold of it.
Nope.
Like Kenneth Copeland says, I want that. Yeah. That's
my
what
force
it is.
feels pretty strong.
It must be, yeah, because that is a great name. If you're a Dominion theologian, that's what they're wanting to do.
Have it.
Yeah, don't ever give it up.
So
don't ever sell it. Don't ever.
We only declare dominion over ourselves. That is
good.
All we have responsibility for.
I have to say, I was a bit nervous when I saw that. Like, oh my God, what if she comes out with like this, we're going to declare dominion. We're going to take dominion over the world. We're going to, take the world for Christ. And I'm like, oh, you can't be that serious. But luckily, that's not the kind of dominion. You're not a Dominion theologian in that sense.
No, and in fact, I was so separate from that world that I had no idea that it even had those connotations. So that definitely has me reconsidering my
Very good. Well, whatever you do, don't sell the domain name, please. I'll buy it off you. We'll just bury it if you never decide to retire it.
I will not sell it to an asshole.
Oh, good. Okay, so thank you so much, Kat. Listen, I've absolutely had a great time chatting with you. So glad we got to meet. I will send you Janice's details as well. So if you want to connect up with her, you can do. And hopefully we'll see you maybe in November for our Mindshift podcast Zoom call. I would love to have you back. People would love to meet you. We'd have a great time. So thank you so much, Katherine. Take care, and I'll keep you.